Hey, I just want to show you how I made this button from our personal portfolio website that just changes the theme between light and dark modes. So it's pretty easy because I'm using DaisyUI as my UI library, so it's doing most of the work here. But I also want to show you how I get and set the theme data from the cookies using Next.js. So let's take a look at that. And first I'll show you my enumerator here. I like to use enums instead of straight strings, because then your IDE can help you out with the naming and it's harder to mess up. So you can see here I'm just matching the names. These names light and dark are from DaisyUI themes, and let me show you those real quick. So you can see here on Daisy's website they've got all kinds of themes that you can choose from. I'm just using the light and dark ones and switching between them. And then in order to actually implement it, all you have to do is set the data theme attribute on your HTML tag. So it's pretty easy to set up there. We just have to make sure we're setting it and getting it, the data properly. So let's take a look at that. How would we actually set the data? You can see here we're using next headers and the cookies function from that. And that makes it really easy to set and get cookies. And you can see here it's just one line setting the theme data to whatever value comes into this function. And you can see up here I'm using use server, and this means this component is a server action. And normally you can't access server components or functions from a client component, but since this is a server action, we can access it from a client component. And server actions are typically used just to set data on the server, and so that's what we're doing here. So once we've got this function set up to set the cookie, let me show you how that button works that I was clicking on the home page. You can see it's just a button here, and when we click it, we're toggling the theme, which just sets the state based on the previous state. Pretty straightforward. And then once the state changes, I'm just calling that function that I just showed you to set the theme data in the cookie. So now that we've got the data set in the cookie, how do we actually retrieve it? Well, I set up this utility function to get the theme from the cookie, and you can see again we're using next headers. So this is only going to be accessible from a server component, but I'll show you how we can access it also from a client component. So this is pretty straightforward. We're just calling cookies.get, and then we pass in the name of the cookie that we want to get. And let me show you how we actually use that in a server component. Here's my base layout file, and layouts are always server components, so that's why we can call this getCurrentTheme function. And like I showed you in the beginning of the video with DaisyUI, you just have to set the data theme attribute in your HTML tag. And so that's what we're doing here. And so let me show you how it works with a client component, because that's a server component and you can access the cookies easily from there, but not so easily from a client component. So with client components, you can see here I've got an example, my logo component, and since it can't access the cookies directly, we'll have to pass that in from a server component. So my navbar component here is a server component, and so it's able to access the theme, and it just passes it in as a prop to any client components. So that's how you can access cookie data from client components as well. But you might be wondering, like I was, why we have to get the cookie from the server in a client component when cookies usually are created and stored on the client side. Why can't the client just access the cookie that already lives there? Well, I found out that a lot of times you use HTTP only cookies, in which case you won't be able to access the cookie. But let me show you how you would access it if it wasn't HTTP only. Because let me show you again, when we set that cookie, we're not adding any options here for HTTP only. So the cookies aren't being stored with that flag set right now. So if I make this little component just to test what we've got, you can see I'm just getting the cookie from document.cookie, since this is a client component. and then we're just gonna print that right here. So I put that in my nav bar. Let me go ahead and uncomment that so we can actually see it. And then it should show up. So you can see here, we've got the cookie data as expected. So we are actually able to access it from a client component if we're not using that HTTP only flag. So that is one option, and let me show you if we do use that flag. Let's go to the set theme, and then let's use that HTTP only flag. So now it should not be accessible from a client component, and this is used for security purposes. Now when it reloads, the cookie data goes away, so we no longer have access to it if we're using that HTTP only flag. But even if you're not using that, sometimes it's better to not access it from the client side, because all your cookies will come in one big string just separated by semicolons. And in that case, you would have to create a custom parsing function yourself to get the cookie that you want. And so I found it easier just to get the cookie from Next.js, because it already does that for you, so it makes it pretty easy. So that's pretty much it. I showed you how to get the cookie from Next headers, pass it to a client component, since this is only accessible from a server component. And then we can also, and then I showed you how to set the cookie data. And so yeah, it's pretty easy. DaisyUI, like I said, does a lot of the work for us. So yeah, I hope this was informative, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.